Yes, you what?
Oh, so hi, am I audible now? My network was. Am I audible now? Hello.
Yes,
Can
you're
anyone
audible.
hear me? Awesome,
Yes, we can
awesome.
hear
All
you.
right, hi everyone. Welcome to round two of ANDL 2025. My name is Emanuela Jima, and I'll be your chair for this round. Um, Panelists in the room, please introduce yourselves.
Everyone. I'm Ezeal. I'm a panelist on the round, and I'm wishing everyone a very wonderful round. All the best.
Hi, my name is Rukaya. I'm a panelist for the round. Good luck.
Cool. All righty. Hi everybody. My name is Sino. I am the chair for panel B. Good luck to everybody in the round. I just want to check if my panelists are here. Is Eliana here?
Yes, I am here. Hi, everyone. My name is Eliana. I'll be your panelist on panel B, and all the best.
Great. And is Matthew Esther here? Matthew Esther.
And I think there's another judge on the call that hasn't introduced themselves. There's a Hugh. There's Tina Hugh. I don't know if she's also. Um,
Hello. I'm so sorry, Sino. On the draw, it's showing that apparently I'm the chair for 1B.
Oh, okay. I've been moved to room 1. No stress. Thank you so much.
yeah. Okay.
Okay, cool. So,
Yeah.
okay, sorry. Hi everyone. My name is Estiana, and I will be the chair for panel 1B. My panelists, could they please introduce themselves again? Matthew Esther or Ileana?
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Eliana. I'll be one of the panelists on panel 1B. All the best.
Here you go. Mm.
Co-chair, it seems the other panelist in panel 1B is absent. Do we continue or?
Um, OC and CAP are in the room, so we don't want to
Coming.
clarify that.
They're coming. They're coming. Just give me like a minute, I guess. They should be here.
Awesome. In the meantime, is OG in the room? OG, are you in the room? Please just unmute and say hi or something.
Hi, OG's in
Yeah.
the room.
Is OO in the room?
Yes, O is present.
Awesome. Is CG in the room?
CG is here.
Is CO in the room?
Who is present?
That's great. So whilst we're waiting on the other panelists, I would just like to say that all BP rules apply. Please feel free to let us know your preferred method for POIs and your preferred pronouns as well before you speak. I'll be timing because there's no time but also time yourself personally because then you'd know like where you are. So that when I say your time is over, it doesn't come as a shock or thrown off. Yeah. POIs are highly encouraged. Just one last check to make sure all the judges are in the room. Is the other panelist on the second panel here?
I think they're here. They just need to audibly confirm. Matthew Esther, are you present?
Okay. So Justina, would you also want to say something before we start the round?
I think you already covered all of it. Let's just have. Okay, great. I think you already covered it. Let's just have an engaging and really fun round, and also just POI preferences, etc. Let's not badger the speakers, and yeah, standard rules apply.
Awesome. So just so we're on the same page, the motion for the round reads: this house regrets the growing trend of celebrity artists turning their personal trauma into artistic branding. Time is 11:33. Prime Minister, the floor is yours.
All right, am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yes,
Yes,
we
you
can
are.
hear you.
All right, so a couple of things. Thank you. First of all, I would be ironing this round. So just in case you want to include that in your ballot or your sheet. Secondly, is preferred PY method. Please just unmute and say your team role. If it's up, if it's OO, if it's CO, just do that. That's all, to be honest. And then I'll take you. No badgering. Funny thing is I spent 10 minutes preparing for the wrong side of this debate. But yeah, hopefully I fixed that issue. All right. So I would, oh, please just give me my timer. Let me try to get my timer. All right. Please, I just want to read the motion one more time to just reconfirm if I really did get this right. Or if someone could help me just read it. Never mind. This house regrets the growing trend of celebrity artists turning their personal trauma into artistic branding. All right. I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. We have to be very clear in this debate. We do not have to defend a world where people cannot sing about pain or where people cannot sing about their issues. We do not have to defend the world who are struggling LGBTQ communities, cannot sing about their struggles there. We do not have to defend a world where people cannot sing completely. There's no way they can sing about mental illness or about issues like they face with depressions, suicide, etc. What we have to debate within this round is what the growing rise looks like. I think it would be asinine to say that gov teams have to defend a world where absolutely nobody can sing about pain or about issues that they may go through collectively or they may go through personally. It's about the rise, what that looks like. And I'm going to, from Prime Minister, give you a clear picture of what that looks like in today's world and why we regret it. Additionally, towards after I'm done with that, I'm going to also tell you what it looked like before the rise and why we would prefer such a world where that rise was shunned or that rise did not exist. So what does the rise look like? And I want to be very clear about this. Now, notice the rise looks like how people make it more of their artistic branding. So it's not just about saying, oh, I struggle with depression and that's a problem. It's about making how most of your songs often have to lean towards sadness every single time. It's not about releasing just one song. It's about making sure that a lot of your songs, your albums, all of that speak to these issues continuously. It's about glamorizing yourself. Someone like Billie Eilish continuously singing sad, depressing songs. Someone like Juice WRLD always talking about depression and about sadness repeatedly. That's exactly what these things look like. It doesn't look like Logic releasing just one song about suicide and it's having the positive impact it had. It doesn't look like that. It looks like artists continuously making these their artistic branding, that pain, continuously making it all that they are about. Secondly, it looks like a combination with how social media exists now, the viral nature of social media, where the purpose of some of these particular artists and the purpose of some of these songs is to, try to spark go viral or to try as much as possible to trend within those particular spaces. But thirdly, we have to consider, it looks like finding artistic ways to try to show what these things look like in music videos, all of that kind of stuff. And lastly, like I had already alluded to, it looks like making these things part of an artist's branding or part of who they are, what defines them. Before the rise, what happened? Before the rise, what we saw was a gradual organic shift into having these kind of conversations. We look at someone like Elton John, who had to come out in the 1970s, I think, for being gay, someone who couldn't do that initially then. What we saw is that people spoke about these issues, sang about these issues, either in a song or at one time, like the Lady Gaga sang about sexual trauma, and that was it. They produced more songs, more tracks, more albums that were not tied to that identity. What we saw was an organic shift towards these particular kinds of issues that made people see them as more genuine, as more real issues that we could talk about, because there wasn't like a monetization of this particular kind of thing. I'm going to talk about that, or a continuously repeated churning out songs or churning out albums that speak to these kind of issues. I'll talk about that shortly. That's what it looked like before the rise, where there was organic conversations. Artists just sang about this issue maybe one time or twice, and that was it. There wasn't like, it wasn't needed to be embedded within their artistic branding. The last thing I want to talk about in terms of like this framing basically is how a lot of what the positives they will tell you on upside are can exist on outside. And to be honest, it's more genuine and organic. Donations can still happen, awareness can still happen. You know why? Because in today's world we have that we have things like the internet, for instance, social media, right? But firstly, I think people know these issues. If you're bipolar, or you have ADHD, or you have a lot of these issues, your depression or anxiety, all of those kind of things, or you're struggling with coming out, for instance, you already know what your issues are. So you already know how it feels for you specifically, and you also know what the problem is. Besides that, there's so many communities and so many people speaking about these issues today that you can relate to these kinds of people. There's content creators on TikTok, all of that stuff. Even you have the ability now to share your issues on places like that, on spaces like that, to speak about this. So awareness is not an issue generally. Secondly, there's also like money donations. All of those things can happen independent of these glamorization or commercialization of sadness or commercialization of these issues. Artists do not need to make this about their artistic branding. I think that's it. I'll take your POI before I proceed to positive arguments.
Speaker, the
Please.
reason why it's so ubiquitous for individuals to come out about their issues and be aware is because of how relatable this has become. Why do you think it's become so relatable today?
Yeah, I think it's become so relatable because of how these things are pushed. I think it's relatable because people do suffer these things. But the problem is when an artist makes it continuously makes it part of the artistic brand, and it actually waters down or desensitizes people to how serious these issues are, because it's intermixed with the creativity and the beauty and the spore of music videos and songs. I think you water it down when you continuously make it artistic branding. That's why we regret the rise. First argument. I think the problem here, and this is the core problem, is how this glamorizes and commercializes pain at the same time. Notice something I said earlier in my framing is that artists can sing one song and then call it a day about these particular issues. That generates enough conversation. We're still talking about Logic's song about suicide till today. That created enough impact. He doesn't have to make all his songs about this particular one issue, right? People still find that song 10 years, 20 years ago relatable. What happens on their side of the house when an artist continuously does this, it makes this kind of pain looks like a normal thing. It normalizes it. Notice when you continuously make this something that you keep going through consistently. Number one is it makes it seem normal in the sense that people see this as something that, oh, I probably would have to continuously go through this. It diminishes or reduces like the possibility of this being something that ends or something that stops. The idea of hope of being maybe one day I might probably never be depressed anymore, one day I might probably not be anxious is gone. What is it replaced by? It's replaced by this glamorization of these particular kind of things. Like, you know what, I should probably accept that I might be depressed and anxious and probably think that that's a good thing. Why is this the case? Because of how these things are infused within the songs. People now begin to relate on a subconscious level these kind of anxiety, depression, all of this kind of pains with creativity, with authenticity. And it becomes very difficult for them to even break out of these kind of harmful loops or harmful things that they may be going through, even if they do find it relatable. That's the problem there. The second problem, and this is very crucial, is how it makes it very easy for people to even be further triggered. You see things like music videos, all of these kind of things that showcase these things continuously. Look, it's not just one song. It's a continuous, like, repeated cycle of like showing abuse, showing suicide. These are not the kind of things that people continuously need to be exposed to, even if they do find it relatable. And because of that, they would most likely want to cling to these things for comfort. Oh, yes, this person is speaking my story. But the alternative is where we do have organic conversations. We have just at least one or two songs about this, and people get to have conversations and see how it is possible for them to break out of that cycle. I'm going to do a lot more in my second speech. I just had to set up framing. But it's very important for you to note. On our side, we think that the rise and combined with how like it glamorizes these kind of issues and how artists continuously do this over and over again makes it worse for people to be able to continuously take this content. Even if they find it relatable, it diminishes how people see the possibility of breaking out of these things and how people see these things as cool now because of how it's influxed with artistry. Very proud to propose.
All right, thank you very much for that speech. The House now recognizes the leader of the opposition to further their debate. Thank you. Sorry, was I audible?
Yes, Chair, we could hear you.
Awesome. Also just a quick reminder, speakers, please put your speaking roles in the text space. So like OG, then PM, then you write your name, DPM, and you write your name. Please don't forget. Let's make sure that's done so that like it helps with speaks and whatnot. Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Great. Time. Okay. I'm going to start my speech. 3, 2, 1. Reason why the case of opening government is remiss with ambiguity is also because it's remiss with conflations of reality. First and most important point of rebuttal is that they frame trauma as something that's a monolith, that for some reason, if you're talking about issues of depression, that you're consistently sad. This is a fundamental lie that ignores the nuance of what trauma is. Trauma fundamentally in framing, and this is the first thing that's substantive in terms of context, but also responsive, is that trauma is a process. That is, when you're doing art, specifically aiming at talking about issues of trauma, you're speaking about the procedure and process of that trauma. An example of this could be that in the instance where we're speaking about someone like Kendrick Lamar, where he's dealing with issues of African-American activism in the United States, and he's speaking about how he needed to deal with problems within his neighborhoods and such and such and such. He's also speaking about his upliftment from those neighborhoods and how his life has changed due to that process. It's not just, oh my God, I'm constantly oppressed by the police state. You're talking about how trauma has evolved as a process. That's the first problem, which a lot of their case relies on, because they say that you're just going to be sad all the time. That's a problem. Secondly, they're assertive. They tell us that for some reason it waters down the issue. Purely assertive. They gave you no reason to believe that. But the reason why that's not the case, and quite intuitively, is that all art deals with expression of this nature. Very problematic on their side. They have to regret art. Third thing they regret is that they regret monetization, whilst also saying that they think that this kind of growth and this kind of normalization is a good thing. I'm going to show you why you can only get that on our side of the house, and why regretting it is ultimately regretting all relatability. Now, from our side of the house, I'm going to do a little bit of context first. Number one, I'm going to contextualize what artistic branding is. We think largely that we agree with opening government in some respects. That is, that artistic branding has to be the identity of the artist, what that artist is going through. What this means fundamentally is that when these artists are dealing with trauma, and that is a fundamental facet of their identity, that they need to brand through it. But secondly, that it looks like songs and promo vids and things like that. But thirdly, and importantly, that the most or vast majority of growth of their music comes from this very branding, comes from monetary branding from here, which brings people to their platform and brings people to their base. That's very important. Second bit of framing that I think is fundamentally important is how this growing trend looks. We think largely, and we agree with them in this regard, that we're talking about things like popular music specifically as art, and most popular forms of art where this branding occurs. That looks like XXXTentacion, it looks like Taylor Swift, it looks like Kendrick Lamar with like Father Time, right? The reason why we think this is so fundamentally important is because this growing trend of utilizing trauma in branding yourself in music has been largely concurrent with the growth of music in general. Look at how capital itself has moved music to become more accessible than ever before. This is a matter of fact that if you look, Travis Scott came to like South Africa the other day. Look realistically how this growth could occur without capital. Third thing that's important is the criteria of this debate, which they needed to prove. Number one, they needed to prove it's illegitimate, and we don't believe they've done that. Number two, harms will outweigh the benefits, and they haven't done that because they're contradictory. Two main arguments then that you're going to get from us from opening opposition. Number one, as to why we are the most legitimate side, and number two, practically why we're winning this debate without a doubt. Number one, we think in terms of legitimacy, we need to talk to two things. Those two things being A, why they ruin art in principle, and that's illegitimate, and B, why they're actually removing the choice of people who vote with their money. On A, why they actually rob art of its identity. Art itself is a form of expression and can never be divorced from that. We agree with them when they try to frame like a more charitable debate, where we're not saying that on their side nobody debates about pain, but we're saying that the growth of people debating about those issues and the normalization of that is something that is removed on their side. But secondly, that utilizing that as a form of branding yourself was the only way that you could grow as an artist. When you rob people of that, you rob a rise in that expression and a rise in people's engagement of art. But thirdly, that growth growth is something that's inherent in the system of using capital to grow art in the first place. The reason why this is so fundamentally important is that in the instance where you think that you can't use this branding to do this, then people might as well, who are trying to make a living, who are trying to grow their brand in music, just not talk about their issues at all. And that robs people of expression, and we think that that's very harmful. In principle, it's antithetical to art. The second reason this is harmful is because people, and the reason why this is growing isn't just some kind of random fact of the nature of using trauma, but it's because people are actively buying this music and putting their money to it. The reason we think that's so important is because it shows that individuals in society are voting with their cash, or saying, this is what I want to listen to, and this is what talks to how I feel. This rise in consumption is something that's inherently legitimate because it shows that people are choosing to listen to that music. And to regret that is to say that that choice is illegitimate of individual society. We think that that's bullshit. They need to respond. And the second thing that's important in terms of this is that it means that we've risen the accessibility of choice in general. Realize that, like I said earlier, you've increased through monetization the amount of music in society and choices between different people who are talking about different trauma, because that's how things have been working. The reason that's important is because people are choosing between now a greater variety of artists, which means it's also expanded the plane of choice that individuals have, and they need to regret that. Cool. Now on to pragmatics, but before I do that, I'll take a point of information from opposing government.
So, Paxton, every single thing you want in the music industry is about pain. Engage then on how you can gain extra leverage given the lack of that expression and authenticity.
Think that you can't. You can't gain the kind of growth that you need without the utilization of that kind of pain and authenticity. And that's what our case relies on. Three main arguments then in practice. Number one, relatability. We think that on our side of the house, we've increased by growth the amount of people talking about trauma generally, right? That's like when XXXTentacion, who's someone who's really, really famous and a celebrity and has a platform, talks about his trauma and is insulated from the pain of having to do it like in society, like because he has power, because of his celebridom and his money, right? He can say, listen, I'm going to talk about my pain and no one can actually, bash me for it. Another person or random normal individual wouldn't be able to come out about it because their father might kick them out of the house for talking about how they're depressed or whatever and not just getting on with life. The reason this is so important is because it means that on our side, we've gotten a scope of normalization of this issue, which means that more individuals through the rise and growth of this have engaged with it. But secondly, it means that we get more accessibility. Realize, A, on their side that they can get things like therapy, but that happens only when you increase normalization, which we only do through growth. But secondly, that therapy isn't distributed effectively over the bounds of capital. It is only opening opposition that through growth deals with accessibility, choice, art as an expression, and creates more relatable music that people buy into. OO wins this debate.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. The House now recognizes the Deputy Prime Minister to further the case of the opening government. Here.
All right, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, I start my speech
Aisha.
in three. What?
Sorry, you're audible.
All right, I start my speech in 3, 2, 1. All right, so I think open opposition ignores a couple of things I said in my framing, and I think it's very important that I establish this, and I need you to imagine what this world looks like. It looks like where we have a continuous churning of these kind of conversations in music, in songs, etc., while these conversations already exist, and they have to engage with that characterization. It is not the case that people do not know what these issues are, or people do not have relatable people that talk about these things. When you go on YouTube, on TikTok, on Twitter, there are so many content creators now talking about these particular issues, right? There's so many videos, even people themselves talk about this particular kind of issues because it empowers them. The community says, oh yeah, you can talk about your issues. It even feels a lot more, It even feels a lot more fulfilling in these kinds of spaces, because these are real everyday life people that talk to you. These are people that, you know, just wear a hat and with a scruffy beard talking to you about depression, all of these kind of things. The problem, we're going to talk about this later, about having artists make money off of this, like they say, oh, it's justified, and making their whole branding off of this, is where you continuously economically and emotionally exploit these kinds of people. Even if it's not, like, even if it's inadvertent, even if it's not, of course, something that they do consciously, we argue that in principle, that is what it looks like. We think these rise even further creates the kind of fatigue where we talk about this kind of issues, makes people say things like, oh, every time she's singing about bipolar, or every time this, every time that. It means that several people who may not even have these issues can't even take these issues seriously anymore. If it's like, for instance, the case, like I said earlier, of like how it was before this rise of, let's say, an artist like Logic singing about suicide, people then began to have these kind of conversations because, you know, it wasn't something that was continuously churned in their faces over and over and over again, making people more fatigued, especially in the kind of climate we exist now, where these conversations are already happening in different spaces. I think that's very important to note. They say we don't prove, I'm going to take it later. They say we don't prove why this is illegitimate. It is illegitimate because of one simple thing. I'm going to talk about why it's illegitimate for the actor and why it harms the artist, sorry. But I'm going to talk about the people that consume this. They say, people are making choices. Like, you know, when they buy this, they're confirming this is what their choice is. But the truth about people that go through some of these issues are, like, again, in several instances, it might differ, but in most of the instances, it is because of that relativity they talk about. And because the artists know that this sells, they continuously, like, people continuously buy into it because of how emotionally tied they are to these music videos, to how sadness, to how it amplifies the sadness, or makes the sadness feel more genuine, or makes the sadness feel more relatable. Because of that emotional pull that a lot of these songs have, they tend to want to buy it a lot more. They tend to want to pay for the concert, all of these kind of things. The problem with that is that it makes it even difficult for people in several instances to be detached from these kind of things. This is how people form identities. Notice that most of these artists already make these things kind of like who they are, who their personas are. Oh, the sad girl, the sad musician, or the depressed artist. The problem here is that people often, because of the parasocial relationships they have with artists, tend to even also see themselves like that. This is how most people form parasocial relationships with celebrities. They tend to see themselves in these celebrities and tend to associate more with that kind of pain, associate more with that kind of anxiety. It becomes very difficult for them to be able to envisage the possibility of breaking out of these kind of identity, or breaking out of these kind of things, because the art they keep consuming is churning out these things and churning them out as normal. They might say, oh, people go through these things in different phases. Like I said, conversations already happening about this, even much more healthy conversations that tell you go see a doctor, even doctors having conversations about this of these kind of spaces. It is illegitimate because these people continuously profit off of an emotional exploitative model of making money. We think that's wrong. How about artists that, you know, want to express themselves? I think in several instances, it is regrettable even for the artist. Why? Because in instances, these people are stuck because the labels know that this is what is profiting them. It means even in instances where you want to pivot to something else, you can't do that because these labels know that this is what is making money. Oh, you're singing about sadness. Why do you want to sing about this the other day, right? They always want you to churn out these kind of songs or these kind of albums because that's, I think even for artists, it is exploitative and it is problematic because they also have to continuously maintain that persona of, you know, the sad artist, the sad person. It means even in instances where they want to pivot, it becomes difficult. Even in instances where they, you know, should have like some sort of freedom from those kind of things, they have to continuously deal with it. They have to relate with it. How do I continuously have to relate with my anxiety, or relate to my depression, relate to my bipolar disorder, to create some kind of new song about it, to make it better this time? They continuously have to deal with or accept those things as part of themselves, part of their identity, without envisaging that they themselves and artists could come out of that and create new forms of art. Regret that. Regret a world where artists have to tie their identity to their pain continuously, where artists have to tie their identity to these kind of issues. They can talk about other things that interact them, because we don't think pain inherently is what makes a whole, like a human being, like completely. Like there's so many other things that they can talk about. They can talk about their joys, etc. But the problem with their side of the house is on the altar of freedom, on the altar of artist freedom, they sacrifice true freedom from being able to, you know, escape from these kind of issues because they continuously have to accept it to be able to create better art. We think that's a problem. What's your POI?
realize, speaker, that you don't deal with my framework of trauma as a process. That is, these
I
could
can't
be
hear you properly.
reflecting on trauma. They don't have to be just
Please,
depressed consistently.
Chair, could you pause my
It's
time? I
journey.
want to confirm something. If I can't hear him, am I also audible? I don't know if I
Yes,
have a
you're
network issue.
audible. I've paused your time. You're audible, but
Can you
we
hear
could
the
hear
speaker who's
him.
asking the POI?
Yes, we could hear the speaker asking the POI. So I don't know if you'd want them to repeat the POI, but your time has been paused.
Sorry, I just want to confirm. Can you hear the speaker's POI?
Yes, I can. Yes, we can hear the speaker's POI.
Oh, right, because I can't. Okay, just restart my time and then speaker, just ask a
Okay.
POI when my time is restarted. Speaker, just ask a
Okay.
POI.
Okay. What I was asking was that I didn't think you dealt with my framework about trauma as a process. That is, depression as a
I
process.
can't hear that. I'm so sorry. I can't hear that. I don't know what the problem is. Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to restart. Chair. I'm so sorry. I can't hear that. I can't. 3, 2, 1. So moving forward, please just try to engage me within your speech. I couldn't hear that. 3, 2, 1. So the problem with this is that artists are boxed in that sense, but they continuously have to tap from these sources of pain, which means there really isn't any incentive for them as human beings to let these things go. They still have to be tortured. Even if there was a possibility that they could seek help to be free from some of these issues, they still have to be tortured. And opening a position calls that freedom. We don't think that it is when labels continuously exploit your pain. And even you inadvertently continuously have to deal with these kind of issues because you want to create art. We don't think that's true freedom. It's illegitimate on principle. A couple of things then. I think these issues are so emotionally heavy that for us to continuously churn out
I don't know if the speaker is still speaking, but I cannot hear them. Can anyone else hear them?
No, I think he dropped off. Was this
Awesome.
the
I
DPM
stopped hearing
speech?
him too.
Yeah, co-chair, I started the time so that we can pay attention to the disconnection policy.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's like on 30 seconds now.
Awesome. He has about 24 seconds of a speech left, so I think even if like it's expired, we can just go ahead.
So was this the DPM speech? His partner, but I joined late.
Yeah, that was the DPM speech. He has about 24 seconds more left of the speech, but he has disconnected, so we have enabled the disconnection policy, and the 3 minutes timer has been started.
All right, thank you.
Ik heb er al gezien, mami. Oh shit.
Yeah, I think he's back now.
Awesome. Collins, can you hear? Collins, if you are speaking, you are not audible. Okay. Co-chair, how many more minutes does he have left on the timer?
We're coming up at about just 10 seconds left.
Okay, so I think after the 10 seconds, we would have to move on to the next speaker because he just had about 24 seconds left. PM, I think maybe you could communicate that to him because he's on the call, but we still can't hear him. So
Yeah, I'm coming. Just 1 second. It's okay, guys. He's not responding to my text either. I think you guys can just continue from to the next speaker. That's fine.
Yeah, co-chair this time up. I just want to make sure we're following the policy.
Yes, the time has been up for quite a while.
Awesome. All right. We thank that speaker for that speech. The House now recognizes the deputy leader of opposition to close the opening half of the debate. Here. Teams, please remember to put your speaking order in the text space. That would be really amazing and really helpful. So please don't forget.
I've been talking and I realized my mic was off. I was just saying POIs verbally, please. And otherwise, I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. There is a fundamental issue with OG's case in that we talk about the problem of like trauma and that you want to talk about it. However, they never address why these things occur, how these things occur, and when they occur. The first thing that we need to look at is the reason that these people are buying like CDs and that they're buying into this art and the industry as a whole is because they actively relate to it, right? If people are actively relating to it outside, it means it is a problem and they want to be able to engage in a way that is healthy, in a way that is like able to process that grief and process whatever going through that trauma looks like, regardless of the artist and the artist's opinion, although we would argue still later in my speech that it's still also better for the artist. Society as a whole, it is still generally better because they're able to process this trauma in a better way. The counterfactual they tell us then is that social media will like take the place of this, right? And that social media is how we're actually going to get people to address trauma and like going to therapy and sitting down and talking to people. The issue that we have with this, that Cheyenne clearly explains in his speech, is that the reason that we have such high accessibility within social media, why it's so destigmatized as opposed to how it was 20, 30 years ago, is because we see a rise in celebrities being able to talk about these things in the very first place. Because celebrities and popular culture is generally what the culture around us follows. When they're saying that it's societally okay to have trauma, it's societally okay to be upset that you've experienced things like sexism, that you've experienced things like racism, it's easier for you to be able to engage with that, and it allows a space in which we can see several social media influences, and we can see an increase in therapy and all of these things that allow people to get this access to be able to help with trauma. To regret it is to regret the rise of these processes too. Okay, but then the next thing that they tell us is that like everybody, right, is going to become depressed from this. Again, fundamentally untrue, because the reason people are listening to this argument in the very first place is because the people are listening to this song in the very first place is because they already relate to it. You're unlikely going to buy into solely depressive music if you've never experienced somewhat of those feelings, right? Because that's unintuitive, and it's also just unlikely because people do listen to music that they find relatable. It's something we all agree with, and so it's unlikely you're going to get depression from listening to all depressive music. That's very weird. The next thing that they then tell us is on this idea of pivoting, right? And that you're able to pivot at any given point, and you should be able, or you aren't able to change your brand, and this isn't something that we necessarily want. There's a couple responses that we have to this. Firstly, trauma is a process, right? It is not something that you can get over in a day. It's not something that you can get over in a song. It's not something that you can get over in an album. Because trauma fundamentally changes the way that you're looking at the world. It changes the way that you engage with people, because trauma by nature of the word itself is something that is deeply entrenched in your psyche, something that is deeply entrenched in your being and has fundamentally changed the way that you as a person can exist and can behave. If it's fundamentally changed you, it means almost everything you do is likely going to some degree be through the lens of someone who's experienced trauma, experiencing trauma, or has a history of trauma. It's why we even see trauma on societal lenses and people facing the traumas that have been passed on from their parents, because it is literally that hard to just move on from it. You can't write a song and move on. That is an incredibly silly point. But also, if people wanted to pivot, it's not like we don't see people in the music industry being able to
You
pivot in the
are.
very first place and people pivoting, right? Like, take a look at the Disney stars, right? All of them have pivoted to sweet, innocent Disney stars, to like actual singers, Selena Gomez, Ariana Grande, all of these people, right? Because people have already invested a following into them. And once they've invested a following, you get things like a cult of personality and you get things like actively buying into their ideas. So you're more likely to like want to continue within that flow. The last thing then is that they say that like that monetization is bad, right? We don't think this is necessarily true because I don't think anybody in this debate is necessarily contesting that the trauma is real. Either way, society still benefits from it, even if it wasn't, but that's not the point. The point is that we're not saying that this trauma isn't real. And because the trauma
You
isn't
are.
real, we think that for the most part, that these people have the ability and they have the right to be able to talk about their own experiences and their own trauma and to be able to monetize off the very terrible experiences that they've had because they get something out of that at least, and it's their own struggles that they're able to talk about. They're not actively stealing people's like struggles and pain, but also because on monetization, we think for the most part that when you're able to better monetize, you're actually able to grow and you're actually able to become like an artist, right? Because when you're unable to put this into your branding, when we don't see the rise in things, we don't actually like see a process in which people are able to engage fully into this and where they're able to profitize and not just be a struggling artist, right? We do want them to monetize because we do want people to be able to cope with this trauma and like be in better positions in the very first place. I'll take you in like 30 seconds. Cool. The next thing that I have to talk about is expression and the expression of the artist itself and how that is incredibly important. Art fundamentally is like at the heart of a person. It is projecting your soul into the world and showing people what that looks like. For the most part, art has to relate to who you are as a person. If the person that you are is fundamentally informed by the trauma that you've experienced, which I've already proven to like my analysis and rebuttal that it is, then it's unlikely that you're able to effectively express yourself and you're able to effectively create art that is good, that is unique, that is different, that is unique to yourself if you're unable to talk about this trauma in a way that's not ignored, that a way that is continuous. I
You
will
are.
take your POI now.
If
See,
existing in pain, if existing in pain gives you leverage within the music field, what incentive do you have to eliminate that pain in the first place, given the fact that you lose out on organic stuff?
right, there's two things that we need to like consider. One, we think that they're trapping us in a false dichotomy, right? The idea that there's a rising trend in artists that like use trauma as a brand does not mean that the vast majority of artists that still don't use trauma in their brands also don't exist, right? There's highly successful artists that currently exist, and we're talking about a regret, so we're talking about our current world, that exist and don't express trauma. And so it's unlikely that you're feeling pressurized to be able to do that. But again, we're okay with the burden that even if you are, that you're still able to get the societal benefits of more people being able to relate to you, of why this is happening, and how that benefits our society as a whole. And so even if you are faking your trauma, I already said this is fine, right? Okay, cool. They're not just a little bit of way-ups. We think that in order for any government team to win, they have to prove the intensity of the harm is much higher, that the scale of reach that the artist industry and celebrity are able to reach is like less impactful than any other means of this, and that vulnerability of people who are specifically experiencing trauma are not what we should be highlighting, and the principle that we should allow music to continue. Thank you.
Okay. Awesome. Speaking of that, I encourage you again to time yourselves because there's no time in what. Because that POI was out of order. I tried to point it out, but I think my connection was a bit, shaky. All right. If I'm still audible, we'll thank that speaker for that fine speech. The House now recognizes the member of government to begin the conclusion of the debate. Here.
Can you please confirm I'm audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Yeah. So for cases of this debate, I'll take CO. I think they've been quiet. So yeah. So I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. There is what holds the music industry in place, and that's the ability of every single individual to find entry and not have reduced barriers. Secondly, it's the fact that music for far too long has been perceived as an entity where self-expression and organic growth in of itself is something that largely nested this particular place. The fact that people are now able to feel and talk about their identities in all instances and talk about every single thing that is proximate to themselves is something that has largely held this particular industry in place. This growing rise and how does it likely manifest? It looks like things such as scouting agents, music producers, now valuing the beat specifically on how to most likely portray pain as the only alternative that is important for them. This means that the entry into explorations of other people's perspective is something that oftentimes is skewed, and the barriers to entry are oftentimes raised in other different narratives and different ways we need people likely explore music in all instances. Even when individuals would want to explore these particular unique abilities, there is no incentive for viewership to exist within such particular platforms. That necessarily means that the optic is raised in people being able to talk about painful stuff that they would most like otherwise in the world where people are searching for viewership, want to hop onto this particular metric of portraying pain in the first place as the only alternative in all instances. What does this likely mean? It means that there is a likely monopolization of societal access narratives and stuff like that being controlled by larger corporations that states how minority and how these particular people portray themselves in the first place. These are celebrity artists, right, that have experienced the privileges of society, that have experienced the most intrinsic things that are actively important, and they now dominate every single space and reduce the entry of people that actively had this particular organic message in the first place entering these spaces in all instances. What this likely means then is that it now outweighs and gives privilege to those that have more viewership and now allows them to leverage information and emotions that they never had in the first place. Given the fact that viewership is specifically within these entities, it means that larger corporations now control this space and control the channeling within which things are actively portrayed in all instances. Looks like simply music industry such as Afrobeats oftentimes lose their relevance now, given the fact that the only metric is what the Western are most likely going to do. Secondly, how artists are deprived at the fundamental level from exploring the divergent versions of themselves, because the only metric of self-exploration now is on basis of pain, and how much pain are you able to hold, and how much pain in of yourself are you able to portray to society. This necessarily means that even when you want to explore the variants of yourself, things such as talking about love and how you view the world and societies and how individuals ought to engage, you're not allowed to do it because the only metric that defines you is what this likely looks like. Thirdly, the clouded narratives of what metrics of success look like within the music industry are now obscured around the idea of pain and it being the only determinant of what good music looks like. It necessarily means that even when people have the organic experiences of what could be right and what could not be, they wouldn't want to explore it in all instances. What this likely means then, the only alternative is how to leverage these particular vulnerabilities for the self-benefit in all instances. Yes.
Okay, realize this is a regrets motion. Every artist isn't pivoting to talking about trauma. You need to talk about the status quo and weigh it to a counterfactual. Realize then your harms don't accrue.
So secondly, what this likely looks like is people now who don't understand the deeper feelings and the deeper understanding of what pain is are now the ones who actively control and actively portray this particular information. It means two things. You now deprive people of understanding the truest, authentic experience in all instances, because now the resources are actively shifted onto those that can necessarily have that entitlement and ability to be able to portray it in the first place. You now deprive viewers of the authentic expression, given the fact that people that often enter this space have no understanding of the depth of how pain manifests and how in of itself is something that is very harmful in all instances. Secondly, looks like media houses now prioritizing sponsorships on specifically how to tailor specific these things. It means that the metric within which artists are scouted by these agencies is contingent on who has more pain and who has the ability to be able to portray these things, which in of itself is likely harmful. Secondly, the AI invasion into this particular music industry means therefore that people likely enter into these particular spaces without the understanding and use AI
POI specifically target this particular audience in all instances. This means that the resource ship asymmetry means that you likely shape the alternatives on how society engages with music in all instances, and this necessarily harms the capacity of organic growth and minority individuals to likely portray the deepest forms and the deepest understanding of what music looks like in the first place. Because firstly, given the lack of understanding of how this particular operation looks like and the likely portrayal by the privilege from the societies that pain exists everywhere, there is lesser incentive for individuals to likely cherish and agree the incentives and how minorities oftentimes fight. Because the asymmetry is quite simple. When this particular growing trend doesn't exist, individuals most likely have an organic intuition to be able to understand that there's a variant form of music that is likely targeted by the minority groups of individuals in society. Yeah, if you lose anything, understand that the shift of asymmetry of how pain is portrayed from the minority individuals to the majority and the richer individuals now harms the capacity of the minority to gain extreme leverage. The likely counterfactual here. The counterfactual is quite simple. Variability within music industry in of itself, and how individuals likely explore the deepest depths of their identity and everything. Secondly, what does this particular likely inclination to trauma means in ability of individuals to most likely understand and treat that particular trauma in the first place? Because you know that when you lose that traumatic experience in all instances, you're going to lose the organic nature and how you actively portray this information. This harms the capacity of artists to be able to tap onto different alternative metrics that are important for them, given the only leverage part of their identity is the fact that you're able to use pain, which in of itself is harmful to society and to the propagation of every single person. Because the only important version of yourself is the pain, and how this is necessarily harmful towards things such as love, empathy, and ability to actively treat human beings and every single person in the ways that is important. You deprive individuals in the fundamental level of the identities that are important towards this self-satisfaction, and the only contingent metric of what success looks like in the entire music business that has to be progressive is on identities, and when you claim that, you harm society. What do we bring here? We bring to you the ability of music industry to progress and tap into the social narratives. When you lose this, the only alternative within which media houses actively cherish and these particular music platforms value who should be admitted and who should sign into record labels is on pain. This necessarily harms the variability and ability of individuals to tap into variant music in of itself. You clamp down that progressive music in of itself, and you deprive individuals of what authenticity or expressions look like. Vote CG.
Okay, we thank that speaker for that fine speech. The House now
Right.
recognizes the member of opposition to begin the opposition king.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi.
This
Yeah,
is
we can.
Ted. This is Ted, just for clarity, yeah. Okay.
This is what? Sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
Ted, it's Ted. It's Ted, rather.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We're
Okay.
using the same device. We're using this. Let me just write on chat.
While you're at it, speakers are please encouraged to write their speaker roles in the text, please. I only have
Yeah.
two teams here, OO and CG. So CO and OG, please do that. Thank you.
We're doing that right away. All right, I've sent. All right, just give me a second. Hello? Yes. Okay. I'll go to the gate. You'll let me know. Which room are you in? All right, so let me just set my timer. And then I'll begin my speech shortly. I'll take PIs whenever, wherever in the order Shakira. And I begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think, panel, the context is largely ignored from the opening half. What is the context of society today and why is art of value? I think people have a large relationship with art because it's emotive in nature. That's to say that ideally you form a connection with art in itself because of what ideally you feel you relate with, right? And notice, art is a depiction of what society is. Art serves a very important purpose in society. The profit, ideally OG is talking about, the commodification, is the least of our worries because ideally artists don't do this for profitization. Yes, profitization is a plus, yes, and it occurs. We concede, yes, that's one thing, right? But at the end of the day, what most people ideally do is ideally they use art as a symbol of what society looks like, right? So that's to say that art is an outlook for society and what ideally it looks like. That's ideally what's the purpose of art. So profit is not the priority, signaling effect is what ideally is the purpose of art. Now let's look at how branding occurs so that people understand why ideally it's a difficult effort and restricting this person is extremely wrong. Notice the artists themselves create a narrative, right? They tell their story on media platforms, they sing songs about their experience, they even start movements and foundations to ensure that no one else goes through. Notice it's a very difficult process, right? And this is something that they do out of their own hearts, right? Limiting the actors from doing this means that you're telling them not to live with their own identity. This is antithetical to the whole idea of art because for you to succeed as an artist, you need to be authentic enough. So the authenticity of the individual is then ideally regretting this means that it is antithetical to the idea of art in itself and the artist itself being able to ideally permeate society using their own identity. Who is an artist and why ideally is this important, right? It is a person with an audience. Their iconography is something that is significant. People listen to their music due to relatability. Artists are ideally gatekeepers of society. Ideally, they do this. They do the role of telling us what society is going through. They evolve over time. They remain with a said identity, right? The reason why this is important is it goes against what ideally Side CD is trying to talk about, right? The audiences of these arts, right, are social media literate. So before OG tells you that everyone will be depressed, it's completely unnecessary. It's very unlikely that this occurs, right? I think the problem is then how then do we have the narrative interpretation done properly? I think the point in which narrative interpretation is occurring, you need to have some sort of relationship with the artist itself. That then means that they need to relate to whoever the person is before ideally you consume their media. So we think that because people relate to this person, they're willing to listen to them, they're willing to give them a listening ear. This person can then achieve solvency in the larger scheme of things, which is something that people ideally don't recognize in the debate, right? One, what are our extensions at the end of the day? One, actualization. Notice the artist exists in its raw form, allowing them to maximize their identity and have creativity based on ideally how they feel, right? This is extremely important because the more authentic they are, the larger, the higher, the likely they are to create more creative pieces, leading to a larger audience, leading to better financial prosperity for the
Just
individuals, right?
one thing,
Secondly,
exploration on
maximization of
different
choice, right?
distribution and how we actually utilize them.
Isaiah mute. Maximization of choice, right? It gives people an alternative identity. Notice at the end of the day, if your identity as an artist fails, because remember, these people are normally branded, they're presented to us as some person, ideally boy band, boyhood dream, they're meant to be heartthrobs. At the event where this does not work out, you have an alternative identity that ideally is your true identity, right? This traumatic branding is not necessarily a fake thing. And notice not everyone will fall into this category. It's very unlikely that everyone turns out like XXX Tentacion or Omale recently or anyone who ideally has undergone depression, right? But we think the most important thing that you need to take from our extension is one, the virtue signaling. Regretting this thing means we ignore people's needs. We are telling people in society that it is not okay for you to brand yourself based on your true identity. This is extremely bad because you then kill individuality in society. Then that means that individuals then have no alternative. They cannot open up about issues. You limit solvency. You can't maximize the utility of the actualization of the individuals, which is extremely harmful in the long run. Because at the end of the day, art is in itself a depiction of society. So if we limit people from traumatic branding, right, it becomes extremely bad because then we cannot achieve solvency in the larger scheme of things. This is extremely harmful, especially for those people who relate to the artist, those people who have a relationship with the artist, and most importantly, it's extremely harmful in the long run because at the end of the day, you will wallow people in suffering. What then is the harm on side opposition? One, I think limiting individuality is one of the biggest harm that exists in the world. We tell people what ideally they can do and what they can't do. I think it's extremely bad because this limited freedom is extremely bad. So they can cannot even come and fiat that we kill authenticity by having people doing traumatic branding. No, we think traumatic branding heightens authenticity. That's our benefit on our side. Two, you glorify suffering because at the end of the day, you refuse to recognize the suffering that people have gone through. That then means that you're telling people to live with their suffering in silence, which is extremely bad. This is completely unfair because the power asymmetry that the artist has and the leverage they have is underutilized. That means you limit the utility of the iconography that the individual has. Two, the benefit that we get on our side is we maximize this said utility because at the end of the day, this person gets to choose. I think Adrian will take POIs because the time is running. Oh wait, I still have time. Yeah, shoot.
Yeah, your side fails to address the danger of artists being boxed to that identity where they continuously have to draw from that pain that is real to make art.
No, listen. It's not everyone who's going to draw from the pain. Oprah Winfrey is an inspirational model. And notice, even at a point where they draw from the pain is something that's taken seriously. If someone such as Oprah Winfrey talks about their story, it gives hope to other individuals. We think this hope is extremely important because it alleviates suffering to some degree. It mitigates the suffering of individuals. It gives hope for a brighter tomorrow. We think your world is extremely bad because these stories are never told. Society assumes that everything is perfect. And at the end of the day, no fixation. People fixate over their pain without any alternative, without any relatability. This is extremely harmful, right? Notice a couple of things and a couple of responses, right? Two responses on why inauthenticity is severe and immediate, right? We think one, it's immediate because people are chronically online, so it will be seen faster. So it is likely to spread since people like sharing and are curious and unique about unique things, right? We think also inauthenticity is unique to their side because it's severe for two reasons. One, it's seen as a slap in the face. People are going through things, and at the end of the day, you're telling them not to ideally air out their voices, which is extremely harmful. We think this responds especially to the pushback on OG in the inorganic engagement that occurs, reducing the likelihood of organic engagement then occurs on their side because people are then hiding their true identities and their true self. We think then there is an incentive for people to be organic, and this is a form of organic branding, right? This occurs because at the end of the day, you form a relationship. We think it allows you to even form a direct relationship with individuals because notice, if 1 in 4 people ideally have traumas and ideally have undergone some semblance of trauma, the artist can ideally tap into these individuals' past history and ideally have some connection with the audience, allowing them to prosper financially. But we think the biggest thing that is completely illogical is saying that everyone will be depressed simply because we listen to XXX Tentacion. We think OG is out of the debate. Regardless of whatever happens, we think OG is fourth. With that, we rest.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Each the House now recognizes the government's whip service to summarize. The House now recognizes the government's whip to summarize the government's case. Here.
Battery for the speech. I want to confirm if I am audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, if you have POIs, kindly please do not unmute. Yeah. Please do not unmute. If you please, if you have a POI, don't unmute. I'm not, and then you can feel free to ask. But yeah, just wait for the POIs, convenience, anything. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. I'm going to start when I'm ready. I think I'm not gonna lie, the stronger team in this debate is opening opposition, and we're gonna just get right head on and win steal the debate from them. Opening opposition tells you that the idea of trauma and making music of trauma is a process. I think the problem here is that this is not weighed for specifically why the perception is different, but I think it's the most intuitive perception in the debate. Even if we assume this is true, we're going to just engage them assuming this is true. They run the first thing, which is the idea of what this identity looks like. I think there's good enough characterization to run the debate in of itself. I think we want to win on the argumentation specifically because strategically, most of the other teams were off. I'll get into that later. The first thing is they talk about why you ruin art for expression. So the idea here is that they say that because you kill the trend, it means individuals no longer can be able to express themselves, and people cannot become better because they can't simply make music about being sad or being depressed. the response here, number one, is basically on the motion itself. It tells you about growing trend of the celebrity artists. It doesn't say that you regret celebrity artists turning their personal trauma into artistic branding. It is a growing trend. Other than all other speakers in the debate, Isaiah characterizes to you on a nuanced level what that specific trend necessarily means in that particular regard. It means you're scouting, it means entry in this specific thing means that only when all agents or probably good managers, your good singer coaches like people who watch The Voice and AGT, people only take you on because you can only make that trendy music, which is probably about your pain and your trauma. It means other individuals have less barrier of entry. So even if Opening Up wants to mitigate this engagement by simply saying they are people that are seen and acknowledged, our argument is that you now other people at like that demographic that you say is there and is little could probably increase but cannot increase because of the specific trend you have created. You need to account for that specific harm and where it ultimately ought to be better. But the way we beat this argument on expression, firstly, is on the idea of the second extension Isaiah gives you, which is the individuals not having a deep understanding of their emotions. Isaiah gives you context in this extension specifically about how every individual now can make music off a phone. We have AI now, we have technology, it's easy to make music. The problem with this is that not everybody now who can make music has studied music, probably even if has studied music or who is making music from this specific perspective has a proper understanding of their emotions. So I have my iPhone 15, I can download the applications, pay the subscription and simply start making music. The problem with this is that when I make music of pain, of anger, of frustration, I have not been taught like people like Taylor Swift have been taught on how to present their music. I have not been taught like other celebrities, but also as Paul says, it's a process. So by the time Taylor Swift makes this music, she's taking a sabbatical. In the sabbatical, she's not just sitting in isolation. She's going for therapy. She's going for all these other things that Collins tells you that you used to become better. It is until the process is done that they now start to make that music because they have understood their emotions. They've understood why they are harmful, what was missing, what they were experiencing, how to control it, how to prevent it from better. This is what makes these individuals make qualitative music. This nuance is what opening up and closing up neglect altogether. We said this nuance is what is missing in the debate because that trend then means that a very significant number of the individuals that make this music make it with zero understanding of their emotions, how to express it, or even understand how to project it. If you can't understand your emotions, it's very difficult for you to one that you can project them in society. If you can't understand why you're angry, how are you going to best make music about anger and your heartbreak if you don't even can't process the feelings that you exited in that particular regard? So the debate is basically very simple on our side. We show you that the world would the absence of X make the world far much better. The absence of this specific trend would make the world far much better and also prevent far many future harms of individuals, misleading individuals. But also because of that poor music, it means to lead misinterpretation of that specific music. But also, secondly, the idea of AI in of itself, it means people devalue the process these other artists like Taylor Swift used to make the music because every other Tom, Dick, and Harry who can't now probably make proper music about their emotions, AI applications, individuals probably write this music for them. We argue that you then devalue the struggle of individuals who have spent days, nights, and have gone through actual experiences because it means the society will never value their experiences because there's less discussion of why Ed Sheeran wrote that song, but a more discussion of whether Ed Sheeran's song is AI or not. I think the discussion on the process and the discussion of the healing and what they want to actually happens on their side of the debate. We see people stop caring in that particular regard. What do we then do in our society in of itself? What we prove is that we get more progress in that particular regard in of itself. This beats the idea of expression because we show you why we have better qualitative expression or why you have it less on their side, but why you give people to have so much pain. They argue accessibility. I don't think this is the case. I don't think you need music for you to understand that 14 million Ugandans are suffering from mental health problems. There's already statistics for that, and there's already modes and organizations, NGOs, UNICEF, all these individuals stepping in to ensure that they make this world a better place. You can't probably co-opt those benefits. But the second thing is the counterfactual, right? And we're going to agree that why we beat opening government here is that the counterfactual is really unclear. We give you a clear counterfactual of the variability, which means that you're able to experience, hunt, learn more about yourself that probably you would have on that side, still weighing over expression. The idea then means that at the end of the day, you have better experiences, which become more meaningful. Because you attach more value to these experiences and meaning, your life becomes more valuable. It means your pain becomes authentic than a world where you create a trend where individuals have now create a factory for pain. But pain a requirement, for you make your trauma a requirement to ensure that you now become good music, to become trendy in of itself. I think that's the most most evil way you can probably project individuals to erode their identity and sell it off for simply likes and vibes. We say you then ruin of what people doing artists to become the better version of themselves and to change the world with their message, because the message they're projecting isn't that, it's simply something that society creates. I think you exacerbate those impacts when you buy into Ted's case altogether and you multiply those harms in that particular regard. That's other extension that Isaiah gives, which is very brilliant, is on the idea of monopoly of access. Listen here, the idea is that the difference between what we talk about from opening and what we talk about, opening talks about authenticity of the individual. Isaiah tells you about the monopoly of this specific music industry, where we say that they create for you a requirement, a channeling of what your success ought to become as an artist. We say that any of it means that the majority can now legitimize pain. Pain has been a tool for the minority. This is the principle within the first extension, the principle implication that the majority of the individuals use their pain and suffering. Black people make music to talk about their pain. But because of that trend, even white individuals cannot talk about their pain. White feminists cannot talk about their pain through music. And you now forget the struggles of the Hispanic women, of the Black women, of the Asian women, because their struggles are ultimately subjective, because there's only one purview in the debate existing. Now majority can use this tool. It no longer becomes a unique tool for majority or for minorities to express their pain and find solvency. You now make it worse on their side, and you use far more gruesome mechanisms on that end. Why do we beat closing opposition? Very simple. Most of the extension is derivative, but on the idea of glorifying suffering, we show you why it's far worse on that side. We beat our opening because we are more nuanced, we are more in the refract with the counterfactual, and we know that the world would probably be a far worse place with the existence of that specific narrative in of itself.
Thank you. Thank
More
you.
access
Thank you.
and you mitigate the
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right. All right. We thank the speaker for that fine speech that has now recognized the chief with to summarize the entire debate. Here.
Here, I just want to confirm that I'm clearly heard if I speak like this.
Yes, you are.
I guess priority will go to OG. I guess they're the more relevant GovT. Take CG if I have time. Cool. Some direct responses to opening government. I'll respond to them in 3 statements or 3 levels of analysis. We think first, the case from opening government is really extreme. 2 things here. First, they say that people are going to get further triggered. We think this is a lie for a couple of reasons. A, the establishment of the threshold. We can just simply argue, if you get tired of like all this depressive content, log the fuck off social media. I am unclear who, like given that human beings have free will, I am unclear why you're going to just wake up and make the active choice to continuously listen to depressive music. That's non-comparative to the rap. The second thing here is they say that everyone is going to be sad. 2 problems. First, they assume that there's an inherent incentive to be sad. I guess just the idea that human beings are very risk averse. But secondly, the idea like what I guess Cheyenne tells you, not all art has to be depressing. We think that's a very false binary. They cannot win on the comparative. The second issue then I have, like organic representation by limiting people. This is why it's a lie. Like I guess the response here is then to talk about why trauma is like to be done well. Ted's framing is really strategic because it analyzes to you why trauma is likely to be done well. Like A, just difference between real and fake representation, things like reaction videos, things like narrative interpretations and that sort of thing. But secondly, the response to inauthenticity is so severe and immediate, since one, like people spread it around so you'd actively know there's an incentive to do things like critically analyze and critically examine art. But even secondly, you have things like cancel culture and backlash, which means that people are going to get fucked over insofar as you want to make the active decision to be inauthentic. I think this response to OG's push, what it does for the debate, therefore, is to respond to the push from OG on inorganic engagement, and does 2 things to then mitigate their case. A, it reduces the likelihood of inorganic engagement, but secondly, it flips the premise to show why A, there's an incentive to be as organic as possible, but second, that organic representation is likely to be done meaningfully. The third thing that I'm going to do, I think this is just like the final response to I guess OG is the chat surrounding how you get some level of fulfillment in the world. This is why it's untrue. A, on magnitude, you have less people talking about their trauma. A, because you feel shame, but B, because you feel like you're going to be perceived as inauthentic because there's some level of stigma around it. We think that's a bad world, specifically when OO analyzed to you and CO's extension on the gravitas of personalization, that sort of thing. Chill. Secondly, in terms of likelihood, there's a reduced likelihood. Like very very simply, I don't think the goal is like people are always going to talk about depressive stuff as the metric of how they interact with branding. I think OG needed to do the legwork to actively analyze why this is true. The third thing here, and this is a very unstrategic concession from OG, is when they say that you're going to have to deal with your problems and that sort of thing. We agree. The only way you deal with your problems is when you have several templates of assessing the markers of these problems and that sort of thing. You have XS extension saying X, you have people like Lil Nas, you have people like Billie Eilish who actively give parameters and whatnot. It's unlikely that that's inauthentic at that point. I'll take you, Collins.
All right, I never said everybody's going to be sad. I said that those who find this content relatable because of the frequency and quantity at which they're churned out tend to normalize their own struggles and do not want to see a way out of it. Even artists tend to normalize it as part of their identity. That's problematic.
That's fine. Like, I guess my response is like very simple. I already explained to you why it's unlikely to be perpetual. Like, that's just a lie. People are not going to perpetually feel sad and that sort of thing. But secondly, I don't think the internal checking mechanism is to actively be sad. You need to prove why that's specifically true. Second, response then to closing government. Closing government is very strange. They say two things here. First, that you're going to have organic branding. The premise is very unclear. Like, we think the premise of CG's case, and the only way you credit the relevance of CG's case is dependent on proving that less people talking about depression, then translates to having more organic conversations surrounding like trauma and that sort of thing. I'm unclear why magnitude is correlative to the level of organic change that you get. CG needed to prove that. Secondly, on the comparative, I think we already proved to you why it's likely to be done well. So the conversation surrounding monopolization is then unlikely it's even worse from CG, specifically because if you have few consolidated people who are talking about their personal trauma, it is bad for the same reasons that CG tell you. Like, people are going to want to people then have, I guess, the leeway to address trauma, I guess, what suits them fit. But even secondly, they can do so because they're probably the only people or the most relevant and potent people within the market. CG then needed to analyze why monopolization happens insofar as literally by magnitude, the premise is more people talk about the problems, but secondly, on likelihood of success, that people are likely to talk about it well, it's uncomparative. Second response here is in terms of the trickle-down analysis, right? We think the converse is likely to happen. The way a closing government argue this is very strange. They say that my time is not up.
Really? Because my timer here is up. How many minutes, seconds
I
you have
have 2
left on your
minutes
timer?
left. I have 2 minutes
2 minutes?
left. Yeah.
But then I
So
probably
sorry,
started
my timer is at 5 minutes and 16 seconds.
Exactly. I have 2 minutes left.
Oh, okay, sorry, then it must be my timer, my bad. All right. Please let me just 2 minutes, right?
Yeah. 5 minutes,
Okay.
16 seconds. So 2 minutes
Okay.
almost, yeah.
Okay. Okay. So 2 minutes, 5 seconds. All right. Let me just do that and then we can go ahead. Okay. Let's go. Sorry. Please continue.
It's okay, I understand. I'll start my speech. I'll continue my speech, sorry, in 3, 2, 1. Second, on trickle down, I think closing government's way of explaining this is to say, artists prefer have this leverage and the leverage is unclear, that people are going to lose out. This is why that's untrue, and I'm going to just flip this on showing you why it creates a very harmful precedent if you bind the counterfactual where you regret the showcase of personal trauma. We think the markers of personal trauma are likely then to be stigmatized as well. Things like race, things like sexual orientation, things like gender and that sort of thing, because again, by CG's own framing, it is definitive of how people brand their personal trauma and that sort of thing. I think one, it just reduces the level of discourse associated with how to deal with this trauma. But secondly, it disincentivizes collective response and collective action to actively fix these issues in all instances. The third thing they then argue is to talk about the third thing they then argue, which is very strange, is you're not going to have a deep understanding of your emotions. I don't think I'm going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think and specifically from DLO does a really excellent job of responding to this material from CG. CG decided not to listen. You don't credit them as highly in this debate. They say that there's no proper understanding of the emotions. We think these songs and these pieces of art are not the only way that they get a level of understanding. It's unclear why you're going to enter into this support like with a blank slate. That's very unclear. In my last 30 seconds, I'm just going to prove why I think we way over opening opposition. I guess opening opposition is right to establish why art is a form of expression and that sort of thing. But I think their case is dependent on proving the likelihood of why this thing is likely to be done well and in a way that's meaningful. That's the only way their impacts are more likely to materialize. And that's why TED's extension surrounding the frame on why it's likely to be done well is likely to become important. Secondly, it's not really about whether or not it's relatable. It's really about like the threshold. So a worst case scenario where like, people do it too much, we think escapism in and of itself is probably still justified insofar as you get like those meaningful outcomes. Vote CO.
Okay. Thank you very much for that speech. That brings us to the end of the round. I think all judges and panelists are going to move to the deliberation room. We have 15 minutes, so I highly would recommend that you do not leave the room so that it makes it easier to just come back and give you feedback. So yeah, the panelists and I will just move to the deliberation room. I don't know if Justina has something to say.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for the debate, and my panelists need to move with me to room 4B for discussion. That is Ileana and Matthew Esther.
Oh, how's everyone doing?
That's it. Not in for exams.
That's actually surreal. We're also writing in like a week. When's your exams?
It's just crazy. It's crazy. It sounds crazy business.